Let's do it.
All righty. Cool. Well, for everyone who's watching this, today we're gonna have maybe a bit of a deep conversation. I don't even know really where this is gonna go, but I'm excited to wing it and find out. So I'm interviewing my Facebook friend Joey Phillips, or Joe Phillips, or Joseph. What do you go by?
I answered all three.
Yeah.
My grandfather was Joseph, my dad's Joe, so it kind of forced my hand.
Yeah.
So I go by Joey.
Well, people ask me, do you go by Steven or Steve? I'm like, look, there's a lot of things to worry about, like get picky about in life, and that's not one of them. So whatever, you know. So seems like we have a decent amount of friends in common, and based on the type of friends we have in common, it's kind of like the more outside the box health related type stuff, right? And currently the way we're connected is we're both talking to people about the Terahertz wand, and I've got the professional unit here. I don't actually have a.
You got the
classic.
Rolls Royce there, dude.
We got the the Rolls Royce sucker here. Usually people will see like a red wand that looks like a fancy hair dryer, and which shoots out a terahertz frequency that goes into things through your body. How do you describe it? I'm curious. If someone goes, "What the heck is this?"
So first thing I tell them is frequency determines physiology. We live in an electrical universe, and we have what's called ion channels, which are electrical channels, and every device that you use, your cell phone, all works on piezoelectricity. And so the terahertz frequency literally can penetrate down into the bone and kind of stimulate stem cells. It works primarily through hydrogen bonding, through water molecules. And so we're water-based. We're about 70–80% water, depending on where you're looking in the body. And so that's primarily the way it works, and through hydrogen bonding, essentially.
Yeah. So what is your area of expertise? What do you do? Maybe I'll start with why I ended up saying, hey, I want to interview you, right? So I saw someone where there was a leader chat about this device, and you said people were talking about one thing we do is we take water, and everyone goes, oh, charge the water with the wand, it does cool things. Now my area of expertise is I muscle test people all day long on things, and I'm pretty good at it. And it was, when I muscle test things, I don't just go, is it good, is it bad? I like to put it on a scale, because you can't just swallow every supplement the muscle test good for you. You got to prioritize stuff, right? So what I do is I muscle test on like 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, right? And I found it interesting that number one, the water by itself, muscle test is like ping. And if, for example, if I took like this curcumin product I sell, which is freakishly bioavailable, if I put it in like a nice mushroom coffee and then I wanted it, it seemed like it would double the energetic potential of it. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
And so you in the chat, you're like, what you should really try is take some fulvic acid and put it in water, then wand it, and it will turn you. What was the phrase you described? It will turn you into a
quantum semiconductor.
I'm like, I don't know what the hell that is, but it sounds good. Let's try it. so I tracked down some fulvic acid, and I know you have another product you sell, and we're happy to chat about that. And so I put it. So you can muscle test something. Is it good for me? But sometimes we forget could I actually handle it? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so the water with the fulvic acid muscle test are really, really good for me, but I forgot to say, could I actually handle it? Which is, why would I not handle it?
Mm-hmm.
And I swallowed it, and my body like freaked out. I had a headache on my body. It was like, what? But it was all for me just weird emotional stuff. And I'm like, what? Like, why couldn't I handle this? And it was all things about tapping into my real potential. Does that make sense? Of becoming really powerful, all these weird things. And when I
like
muscle
quantum
tested,
consciousness.
yeah, so when I muscle tested, well, what is this doing? It's doing something in my body. Then I went through the system, says my nervous system, no, digestion, no, don't. And when I got to DNA expression, it was like ping, bing, 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 bing. I'm like, Then when I looked at your comment, and I tracked down what you said. You were like the DNA dude. I'm like, okay, we need to explore this a little more. Does that make sense? So here we are.
Yeah.
So talk to me. Why charging with the terahertz frequency would be so interesting, and what we got going on here. Because I will say that is the combination of this wanted water with fulvic acid in it is maybe one of the most interesting, powerful things I've ever muscle tested, period.
Well, maybe we should start with what fulvic acid is. Most of fulvic acid you'll come across is derived from like a peat bog, for example. And it's just, 50,000 years of breaking down of organic matter, plants, animals, into this rich, almost like mud, if you will. And so they extract it. And why it's so powerful is because it has all the minerals in it. Like literally almost every trace element and mineral that your body needs to function correctly is found in a fulvic acid. And so, you could trace most diseases back to some sort of mineral deficiency, is what they say. And so the fulvic acid is great by itself. And so I've been experimenting as well, charging the water and charging different supplements. I actually formulated this guy. It's called Reverse Effects, and it's got 125 milligrams of fulvic acid in it. And so I would, a few months back, I started experimenting with charging the water first and then adding the powder to it and then letting it dissolve, spinning it around, and then charging it again after that and then drinking it down. And I started noticing that my energy levels would increase. And so when you talk about fulvic acid and all the minerals, it also has a 18 amino acid profile as well. And so the building blocks of your DNA can be enhanced, if you will, by a fulvic acid, because fulvic acid naturally has what's called a C60 molecule in it. And if you look up C60, it's called a Buckminster fullerene, a buckyball. It kind of looks like a soccer ball. It's a really cool looking geometry to it. And when you start researching the C60 molecule and cross-reference that with terahertz frequency, which is what I did, I actually found a study that talked about how it changed the water with the fulvic acid in it. It changed it to a coherent quantum vibrational state. It was almost the exact terminology that they used. I said,
a coherent quantum vibrational state.
So being coherent is, like I said before, we live in an electrical universe. I think Nikola Tesla said, if you want to know the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. 369, Fibonacci sequence, all these sorts of things, flower of life, the universe, and down to the flowers, the macro to the micro. The whole universe works on frequency. So when you start researching the C60 molecule a little bit more, it leads you to what's called aromatic hydrocarbons or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Okay, so they've actually found the C60 molecule in space, and they actually claim that it's the origins of life itself. In other words, it makes stars. So, we're basically stardust, if you will. Yeah. And so when you talk about DNA, they actually mention, when you look up polycyclic hydrocarbons, it's the starting point and building block of RNA, DNA, and protein synthesis. And so fulvic acid by itself is powerful, but when you charge it, it takes on more, I guess you could say, more electrical properties to it. And, fulvic acid by itself increases ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It donates like 14 trillion electrons to your body. So you can supercharge yourself with just the fulvic acid, but when you charge the water with the fulvic acid in it, there's something special that happens that takes place. And I believe that it's energizing it to the 100-fold, if you will.
Seems to be, yeah.
You know, so it's really fascinating to study fulvic acid by itself. There's so many different applications, and I believe why you were feeling the way you were with the headaches. There's a study on fulvic acid you go research. It talks about how it has anti-inflammatory aspects to it, but it also can stimulate what's called pro-inflammatory cytokines. And the reason it does that primarily is because it's killing pathogens, viruses, fungus, you name it. And so when you take high doses, which they do not recommend, nobody should really be taking more than, obviously you got to consult with your healthcare provider, and this isn't medical advice, but you really shouldn't be taking more than 500 milligrams a day, because studies show that when you take high doses of fulvic acid, it can actually release more pro-inflammatory cytokines. And this could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how your body can react. Like you can have what's called a Herx reaction, a Herxheimer reaction to it, which would feel like, flu-like symptoms, maybe you're dizzy, headaches, those sorts of things. While it might seem bad at face value, it's actually doing your body a whole heck of a lot of good, because it's working on getting rid of all the crap in the body. Yeah. So you don't want to take too much, but boy, I'll tell you what, it's powerful stuff, man.
Well, here's my explanation of coherence, because one thing I work with people a lot is changing their heart coherence of intention, and so in that context, coherence is just the accurate, healthy alignment with the original blueprint. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So when I see something like this, it's like, if I had a tuning fork that I hit and it's vibrating, and then I could influence another tuning fork to come back into alignment with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
But when I look at this, it's the analogy I thought is like, oh, how about we take this tuning fork and we plug it into 220? Then it's like,
Yeah.
That makes sense. It's like, oh, we'll take this tuning fork thing up, bam. Yeah. So
your body needs energy for almost every single chemical reaction that takes place through ATP. That's what a fulvic acid can do for you. But the real reason why the terahertz frequency works so well, again, as I stated earlier, is through hydrogen bonding, through water molecules. Every single third biochemical reaction in the body that takes place is a hydrogen bond. In fact, the spiral of the DNA itself is held together with a hydrogen bond.
Oh, interesting.
And so when you vibrate the water molecule with the terahertz frequency, it's changing the structure of the water. And so one thing I noticed when I started doing this, so I would mix this powder with water previously, and it would dissolve eventually after about 50 spins with a spoon. So one thing I noticed is when I started charging my water first and then adding the reverse effects to the water, it would almost dissolve it almost instantaneously without me even trying to spin it. And so I have kind of a hypothesis about what's taking place. So much like a watermelon, they say that most water molecules, unless it's like a structured water, cannot penetrate the cell membrane. And so it kind of just washes off the side of the cell. Some of it gets in, but most of it doesn't. They say that in order for the water molecule to penetrate the cell, it has to be at a 0.002 submicron level. So very, very small water molecule. What that does is push the toxins out of the cell. This is why structured water works so good. You could even go research Chernobyl, around that area in Russia with all the radiation. There was a tribe that survived all of that, and it turned out they were drinking water that was coming off the mountainside that was being structured when it would travel down the rocks. And what are rocks except minerals, right? So as it traveled down, these people survived that whole disaster because they drank structured water. So structured water is broken down into the submicron level and can push all the toxins out of the cell. So when I added my reverse effects to the water and it dissolved so quickly like that, a little light bulb went off in my head. It said, this must be what's happening, is it's breaking down the water molecule. So they say that the watermelon is the only known fruit that has that capability at the submicron level for the water to penetrate the cell membrane. And so, you know, water is life. Water has memory. Water holds frequency. I mean, we're one big hydroelectric machine. It's really what we are. You know, you have sodium, potassium, calcium pumps, all these electrical channels in the body. Yeah, go ahead.
Have you found that when you drink the charged water that it seems to hydrate you better? Because certainly for me, it like I don't have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, even if I drink water late. It seems like my body just sucks it up. I'll tell you one very interesting thing is I got this fancy indoor trainer that I hooked my bike up to that it will tell me like, you know, my power output in watts and different things like that. And it has a kind of a structured training program to, you know, ride at this specific watt for this amount of time, right? And so I had been doing some time with it. And then when I started drinking the water that was wanted, it seemed like my heart rate was about 15 beats per minute lower for the same effort. Right.
Yeah, so you got calcium signaling taking place in the heart primarily. The number one gene for your heart, they actually call it Tin Man because the Tin Man had no heart. So the number one cause for heart disease is caused by this gene called Tin Man. It's primarily controlled through calcium signaling. So calcium signaling controls the variable heart rate and also couples with the sodium calcium exchangers in the body as well, but primarily calcium signaling. So when you're drinking the charged water, and I actually found a study the other day that that the terahertz frequency has the capability to modulate calcium signaling in the body. Now, this study was primarily done on skin fibroblasts, and the study was actually about skin cancer itself and how terahertz frequency can inhibit the calcium signaling channels involved with skin cancer. But we all know that this device can penetrate down to the bone up to a foot. So if you're wherever, you know, I tell people, wherever you're directing this device, there's going to be magic that takes place.
Yeah,
if you have a
it's
heart
super
issue,
interesting.
you know, obviously if you have a pacemaker and you want to consult your healthcare provider, and there are certain exceptions to every rule, but primarily speaking, like I said before, we're one big hydroelectric machine. You have all these electrical channels in the body, and the terahertz frequency, as I'm finding out, as I start digging into more research, has the capability to modulate all these signal transduction pathways in the body for our benefit. Now, there are studies out there, I will say, when you first start researching terahertz, there are studies out there that talk about how it's actually harmful. Now, it can be kind of confusing when you're reading those studies, and you have to take into account the time duration, the amount of power they're applying, and all these different variables that come into play. I actually have a really cool graphic I could share with you later if you want, on all the variables that determine the outcome of whether it's going to be detrimental to you or helpful to you. And so a lot of times in these studies, they're taking it to the full-on max. They want to see at full power and long duration, right? We've been recommended through the iTera company not to go for more than 2 hours at a time. I would definitely recommend that because studies show if you do longer than that, it could actually be kind of detrimental to you. But really, in essence, it's really about, like anything in life, moderation. You know, obviously, if you're pointing it in one area at full blast for 4 hours, it might have a detrimental effect on you. Okay.
Yeah.
So those are the studies when you start researching it. Like when I first started researching it, I was like, "Whoa, this is not good," right? But then I started digging more, and then I understood how the methodologies they were using to test, and then a little light bulb clicked that said, "Oh, that's why," because they're testing it full max.
Like you don't use a fire hose on your garden.
Yeah, exactly. Good analogy. Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's like and you don't use a fire hose on people either. You know, it's like that's crowd control. You know, it's not cool.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
what a question for you. I know you told me you ended up selling your wand to some guy. Had you used it much on people before you sold it? I know you're waiting for another one. What was your experience so far with it before that?
For me personally, okay, so I was in an accident when I was 18, around 18 years old, up in Coeur d'Alene. I rolled my Jeep off the side of a cliff. It was rainy night. We were up to no good as kids.
Yeah.
I overcorrected. I had big 33-inch mud tires on this Jeep Wrangler, and I overcorrected, and the Jeep flipped off the side of a cliff about, I'd say about 60-degree fall. I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. My buddy wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He got thrown. I got thrown. He ended up hitting the tree, getting knocked unconscious. I ended up getting thrown, and the Jeep came back down and rolled on top of me. Okay? Only thing that was sticking out was my head and my left foot. I've got a humongous scar on my hip from the roll bar. So I was pinned underneath this Jeep for like, I don't even know how long, 4 hours at least, begging for help, crying out to Jesus, save me. I'll do whatever you want,
Yeah.
And so luckily, my buddy woke up, and there was a guy got in a fight with his wife, and he had just happened to be sleeping in his truck up in the mountain. Anyways, long story short, I could not walk for 6 months. My knee was probably about this swollen. It was bad. I was in the hospital for 6 months. It was just really bad all around. Then I got hooked on painkillers for 12 years. Like, it was just a downward spiral from there. So I always knew that at some point in time in the future, I was going to have knee surgery. There was no broken bones around that area. It was mostly like cartilage, ligaments, tendons, that type of thing. But I had always had problems with my knees. And so about 2 weeks before I got this device, the weather was starting to change. And whenever it gets like humid outside, the pain really comes and sets in. I had not been able to sleep. I was tossing and turning, my friend, for, a good 2 weeks. It was really painful. And so when I got the wand, I used it on my knee for 3 consecutive days for about 20 minutes per session. And on day 4, the pain was gone. Now, the pain had gotten so bad, I was actually afraid to drive my vehicle because my knee was locking up. I couldn't lift my knee to hit the brake, and I got kids, and that's not safe, right? So I was starting to get worried. And thank God for this device, man, because in 3 days' time, it was 20 minutes a pop on the session. And I sold my device shortly thereafter because a guy hit me up, and he was in more pain than I was. So, and as well as I do, the orders were backed up like crazy. And so I felt bad for the guy. I ended up selling it. Well, it turns out I haven't really needed it since. So I did it for 3 days, and then literally no more popping, no more knee popping, no more pain, no more stiffness. It's like a freaking miracle. Like, literally, I'm telling you.
And the amazing thing is your story is not that unusual. I mean, I interviewed people for like 5 hours, like story after story, some even crazier than yours. Oh, blah, blah, blah. My whole spine was whatever, and I used it once, and the next day I've been fine ever since. I'm like, what? Like, it's just that's weird.
Frequency determines physiology.
Frequency determines physiology. Yeah, that's super interesting.
It's absolutely true. If you can modulate the electrical channels and the water channels in the body, right? You're like I said before, you're a hydroelectric machine. You've got a plumbing system in your body. It's called the aquaporin channels. Anywhere water goes, you got an aquaporin channel. Anywhere water is, you've got hydrogen bonding taking place. When you wand an area of your body, it's vibrating the water molecule in your body and changing the structure of the water molecule, which then in turn impacts how the proteins fold. It's called your ubiquitin proteasome system. It's your protein quality control system. And it's involved with literally every flipping disease you can possibly think of. It's the UPS system. I always say, what can Brown do for you? That's how I remember it.
Yeah.
But
so what is
that's
your
how it works.
what do you have some sort of a health practice, or what do you do, Joey?
So I got into health years ago. I had a buddy of mine who had a SCIO machine, which is a frequency-based modality machine. It could scan up to 10,000 different things going on in the body in 3.5 minutes. I wanted one really bad, except I didn't have the 20,000 to lay down for it. So he recommended I go take these courses through the Institute of Bioacoustic Biology. So that's what I did. I became a bioacoustic technician / practitioner. And so what we would do is we would record people's voices for 30 seconds, and then the software would convert that musical tone into numerical mathematical frequency matrix that would give us a printed report of which genes and enzymes and proteins, vitamins, minerals, you name it. It would give us a humongous report. And so I've been in the frequency modality arena for health for quite some time. The only problem was, as my PhD friend up at Coeur d'Alene stated, the reports are great, but people do not know how to interpret it. Even the practitioners don't know how to interpret it. So that kind of started me off on this journey of researching. So that's primarily what I do, is I research genes and pathways, and then I figure out, which genes and which pathways are associated with which diseases, because there's like 22,000 diseases that they know of. Every single disease has a very specific gene and subsequent pathway associated with it. And every one of those genes and pathways can be modulated back in your favor through epigenetic expression through different vitamins, minerals, and herbs, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I do, is I do health consultations now. I don't use the frequency NASA technology anymore because this way is far superior, because the science of testing will never catch up to the research that's available. They're about 50 years behind, right? And so the researchers are always out in the forefront. And that's primarily what I do. You tell me your top health related issue, and then I figure out which genes and pathways are primarily causing that issue, the negative expression of those genes and pathways. And then I try to figure out exactly which compounds in nature will modulate those back in your favor. And it works like a charm every time. It's amazing.
Awesome.
So that's actually
so how would people?
That's actually how I formulated reverse effects. Is I would take on clients for 5 years, and I got sick and tired of building protocols with like 40 different supplements. So I got with my partner, and we developed something that has 22 ingredients in it that targets 10,000 genes simultaneously.
Awesome. So if people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
DNAdiligence.com is a good way to do it. I'm on Facebook, Joey Phillips. DNAdiligence@gmail.com. So that's primarily how you can get a hold of me.
Cool. Well, it's been a super interesting conversation. I'm one of those people like, if I talk to someone who's researched stuff for 20 years and they gave me the footnotes version of it, I could probably save myself a lot of time.
Oh yeah, that's what I do. Most of the clients I work with have have gone through like medical bankruptcy. They've spent like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I'm like, why didn't you just come to me first?
Yeah. There you go. I mean, my belief is always just like, okay, simpler, easier, less expensive. It's like I'm always looking for thing after thing. And I used to sell a different frequency device that was like $1,500, and I sold more than anyone in the world. I'm like, well, this looks cool.
Yeah.
Cheaper. Simpler.
The technology is amazing, man. I mean, it really is. It's, like I said before, all the genes and pathways in the body vibrate at a certain frequency too, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So
it's like,
we should get
turn
together.
the machine on, point it at what's wrong, and drink the water first.
Yeah. Charge your water, throw some reverse effects or fulvic acid in it.
Yeah. I'm going to start charging my water first.
Acid.
and then put whatever supplement or whatever I want in it
I
after.
charge it before and after.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just weird like
That's
that.
what I think. That's what I'm gonna do. Yeah, I'll give that a try.
I believe if you charge it beforehand, it allows whatever you're putting into the water to dissolve a little bit easier.
Yeah, very interesting. Super cool. Awesome, man. I appreciate your time. I look forward to you
right,
getting
Steve.
another device soon, hopefully, and being able to experiment a little bit more. But amazing story you have. So I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
man.
Thank you.
All right.